Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Review Den. Now, if you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I've been going through City Interactive's Wings series. I just finished the World War II focused Combat Wings games, namely Dogfight 1942, so I guess it's time to cover the World War I focused Wings of Honor games. Now, before hitting the official games though, let's look at the spiritual predecessor to the entire series, ACES of World War I. ACES of World War I is one of the first releases from development team Tatanka, which would later join City Interactive, to make it out of Poland. Their roots had been in the PC gaming demo scene, so in all fairness, at this point they were less an official company and more a loose collection of programmer friends putting out their work for anyone who would be willing to see it. By this point, they had published a few games in their home country, but this managed to get a boxed English language release for us in the West. Now, normally I try to bring out the positives in the games I review, but I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is a pretty bare bones game. I don't just mean in the presentation. A, that's obvious, and B, we've seen plenty of simple looking games with fantastic gameplay. No, I mean the game itself is just too stark, and sadly for its own good. Okay, normally I don't start with a presentation, but this just can't be avoided. This has to be one of the most basic looking games I've ever seen. I remember when 3D accelerators first came out, and even those games were more detailed than this. Even the original software-based MechWarrior 2 had more environmental density, or at least character, than what we get here. This is one of those cases where they probably should have baked in more mountains or valleys or waterfalls or spinning hoops or anything, just because this is just harsh. There's almost nothing on the ground, almost nothing in the air, and the ocean is flat blue with some squiggles in it. The planes themselves are barely passable, and the special effects are almost non-existent. It's just, ugh. Sound design is pretty much the same. Engines and guns during the mission, entry-level MIDI music in the menus. Everything here just looks and sounds like something out of Windows 3.1 or Windows 95. It's there, but that's it. It exists. Now, in terms of content, you get a linear 20-mission campaign which you can play from either the Allies or Central Powers. But before you go thinking you'll see unique sides of the conflict or different mission arrangements, you don't. The missions are exactly the same, regardless of which side you pick. They just switch the planes around. Basically, if you play as the Allies, you apparently play as Eddie Rickenbacker, a US World War I ace, and if you play as Germany, you are written in as Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. But again, the missions are exactly the same. They are completely generic. Most missions are dogfights, but there are a few nigh impossible bombing runs tossed in. Now, you might look at the incredibly basic presentation and content and assume that applies to the gameplay as well. And you'd be right. Now, I don't mind simplified flight games. Arcade or simcade flight games are an absolute blast when you aren't in the mood for spending 10 minutes adjusting radar azimuth, but this isn't arcade, it's just basic. There's no real momentum or weight when you turn or maneuver. You immediately move when you touch the controls and immediately stop when you let go. Almost no momentum, no outside forces, just a robotic on or off. The only external force you have to worry about is gravity, and believe me, the moment you start taking damage, you start to feel it. See, World War I fighters were slow. That's totally realistic, but they were also extremely light, leading to some very tight-knit dogfights. The next game nails this, by the way. Here, though, they feel like lead weights. You barely have enough lift to stay level at full speed, and every single bullet that hits you cuts down your top speed. The moment you take damage, you lose your ability to climb or turn until you're holding the nose way above the horizon just to keep from sinking into the ground. In one-on-one encounters, this puts you at a disadvantage, fine, but against multiple enemies, it usually spells a lost cause. The AI is very good at getting on your tail and immediately scoring those hits, so if you take any damage early in a mission, it's really not worth the time and effort. Just make a beeline for that reset button, champ. Again, it's not that it's a complex flight model, it's incredibly simple, it's just extremely unforgiving in an arcade-style game. Staying afloat on an enemy's tail becomes more and more difficult until you inevitably keep entering these annoying scripted spins. Long story short, if you take any damage before the last 2 or so enemies, your mission's toast. What's also frustrating is the bizarrely hardcore hit detection. Don't get me wrong, any armchair wargamer will tell you that hitting a distant moving target with guns is extremely difficult, and World War I bombs had neither guidance nor blast radius to be overly useful. I totally get that. But these are arcade missions. It would be one thing to ask you to down 1 or 2 fighters or bomb a hangar or some trenches, but this game will sometimes require you to down 4 or more fighters while bombing an entire enemy base, or having to bomb specific vehicles in a convoy with no bombing site and enemy AAA that can down you in 2 or so hits. It's a question of one or the other, guys. Either have arcade missions with arcade gameplay, or a hardcore sim with realistic objectives. When you mix them, they just don't work. Imagine playing Afterburner, but all you have are a pair of these realistically rendered World War I Vickers guns with no power, no speed, oh, and they keep jamming. Is it that bad? Okay, maybe not quite, but it's the best way to make my point. Tatanka may have had some passion in making more serious gameplay at this point, but it was inconsistent. The flight model is bare-bones simplistic, but unforgiving to damage. The hit detection is incredibly difficult and unforgiving, but the missions task you against comical odds. It just doesn't fit together. Games consist of many elements, but they have to fit into a cohesive package, and World War I ACES just isn't it, Chief. In fairness, it was their first attempt at the genre, and the good news is that they clearly grew from the experience because they made some super fun games afterward. But you might want to avoid this one. It's interesting in a way to see where it all began, but that's pretty much about it. ACES of World War I is not on Steam, and it doesn't really play that well with Windows 10 or 64-bit operating systems, although you can possibly finagle it to work, possibly by getting some old runtime DLLs. All the same, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and to anyone new, would you be my next subscriber? Thanks again, I'll see you next time where I'll cover the first official Wings of Honor game, but until then, be sure to keep going no matter what, because you are worth it.